So we've been talking about sustainability. We've been talking about all of these ideas and all of these concepts of how we build sustainability into our communities, how we can, as the title of this course is, plan for a sustainable society. And so today's lecture is going to focus on some examples of actions that communities have taken to foster sustainability, whether it be environmental, social, economic, whatever. And so hopefully this will give you some ideas of how all of these ideas and theories and concepts that we've been talking about over this semester, over the course of these lectures, can be applied in the real world. So for those of you who are considering, community development, urban planning as a career, this is kind of the work that you might get to do. For others, it's still important, right? So hopefully as you're out into your lives, you will recognize practices in the community that are being done to foster sustainability. You might be able to see where you can plug into those, either as a volunteer, through your work, whatever it might be. Hopefully these examples will help bring home what I've been trying to teach y'all over the course of this semester and show the reality of sustainability and how we get there. So moving along here, focusing on housing at first, because this has to do with economic and social sustainability particularly. It also has elements of environmental sustainability. So looking at the data here, you can see that home prices have increased much faster than incomes for quite a while now, since the mid-90s, so going on 30 years. Well, yeah, since about, 1990, you start to see it change. So we saw a bit of a decrease right here. This is that 2008 economic downturn, right? Largely driven by collapse of the housing market. But since 2011, 2012, we've seen a even faster increase than we've seen in a long time, since really the early 2000s. So this was kind of the dot-com bubble back in the early 2000s. Y'all were babies, most of you, when this happened. Then it still continued, but had a few ups and downs, and then we've seen kind of a rocket since the aftermath of the 2008 downturn. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this coronavirus and how that impacts the housing market. I'm going to guess, given the enormous economic collapse that's happening right now with people losing their jobs and businesses shutting down, the housing market's going to take a dive for a while. But who knows? Maybe the suburbs will become the hot spot again as people want to get further away. So in the event of future social distancing, they have more space to do it in than people living in cities. Who knows? This is an interesting time that we live in. But sorry to get off on the tangent there. Let's focus on what we do about this. So we see an enormous disconnect between wages and housing. And that's playing out in a lot of different ways across our cities. So what we have is an affordability gap between what people make and how much house they can afford. And so if you look at the picture here, you have to see the hourly wage a household must earn working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, in order to afford the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom rental home without paying more than 30% of their income. So when we talk about housing affordability, the typical limit that's used to measure that is 30%. If you're paying more than 30% of your income for housing, you are considered cost burdened. And so in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment here in Wisconsin, you'd have to make $16.52 an hour. Now, if you have a 2-income family, that's pretty doable. It's $16.52. Somebody do the math. Let me do the math on that real quick. So Sorry, I should have done this before. So $16.52 times 40 times 52 is $33,000 a year. So if you're a married couple and the combined income of the two of you is 33,000, that's not unreasonable. For a single person, that's a lot, right? Could be a lot. If you're, say, a single mom and have a kid, you want a 2-bedroom apartment so your kid has their own room, that may be a struggle for you. You can see in other places in California, it's $32 an hour. Let's see, I think that's the highest. Yeah. Oh no, DC, Washington DC is $34 an hour. And so you can imagine for families, that can be a lot, right? It can be hard, particularly in those sort of high dollar coastal states. It can be hard to find affordable housing, even if you're making a pretty good wage. A decent salary is not going to get you very far in places like California, DC, New York City, and the like. And we see that both in the rental market and in the ownership market. So one solution to this has been drive till you qualify. Basically, you just keep driving and driving down the highway further and further out until you find a house that you can afford. The challenge that creates is that you're spending more time in the car. It increases traffic congestion. It increases air pollution and all of the negatives associated with automobile driving. You lose social cohesion and social capital because you're sitting in the car all the time. You don't have time to build relationships with the people in your neighborhood. So this drive till you qualify mentality is affecting the environment. It's affecting social capital and social sustainability. And oftentimes, the increased cost of driving, which we don't account for in accounting for home costs, can actually make it unaffordable to live farther away. So we don't always account for our costs appropriately, and that becomes a challenge that people have to deal with. So we want to think about that as we go along. So in many of our thriving cities, we have enormous homeless challenges. And homelessness, there's kind of two types of homelessness. Almost, there are the chronic homeless. Many of those folks have drug issues, mental health issues. Some just voluntarily want to be homeless. They don't want to have to deal with housing for whatever reason, right? So that population is an enormous challenge for cities to deal with, but that's more of a mental health, public health issue. The economic homeless are those, who could be making a middle class income in places like San Francisco, New York City, other, expensive cities like that, but simply can't afford a place to live because the housing market is so distorted and so expensive. And so those are, teachers, firefighters, police officers, college professors, folks that make a good living and would live pretty well in River Falls, would be homeless in San Francisco because they simply don't have the money to afford rent or certainly purchasing a home in San Francisco. And so those are kind of the two different populations that we talk about when we talk about homelessness. And there's two enormously different approaches that we have to deal with in terms of providing services for those folks. So for the chronic homeless, the ones with the mental health and the drug and those issues, any type of housing for those folks has to come with a social services component as well. So, even if we build adequate housing, many of that population are not going to be able to take advantage of it because they have the drug issues and the mental health issues. So if we're going to provide housing for that population, we need to make sure that we have drug counselors and social service counselors and people who can help prepare them for life on their own, give them build the capacity, give them the skills they need to function in a formal housing setting. We can't just build housing, put them in it, and expect them to be okay. We have to support them as they transition out of homelessness into a more stable and productive life. For the middle class homeless, the folks in San Francisco that are living in their cars because they simply don't have they can't afford housing with, they don't have drug issues, they don't have crime issues, they just simply can't afford a place to live. We need more housing. So we need to look at our policies and our strategies that are limiting the housing for those folks. So we see this problem in communities that are growing very quickly. So when we have rapid growth, land prices go up. The housing market, builders tend to focus on the high-end market because that's the most profitable for them. And so you'll see what gets built in the private sector is largely high-end homes, high-end condos, luxury apartments, those kinds of things, because that's, the differential cost in construction is fairly small, but what they can charge in terms of rent or in selling that home is much higher. So that's what tends to get built. Also, when we see cities that are suffering from stagnation and decline, what can happen in those communities is that you have disinvestment and you have spreading blight. So it doesn't take very long for an abandoned or a vacant home to become an eyesore and then to become a detriment to the surrounding neighborhood. And what we also see is in some of these communities that are struggling with population decline, even when there is potential investment, oftentimes it doesn't actually benefit the community because many of the people, because there's been stagnation for so long, there's no new housing. Even if a new business locates there, the potential employees end up living elsewhere because there's not options for them locally. I think I talked about the example of Bay City, Texas, had the $2 billion manufacturing plant located in town, and guess what? All the people lived 45 minutes away because that's where there were available houses for them and better schools and other things. So blight, decline is a challenge that can lead to affordable housing issues, and the pictures here show how quickly blight can become a challenge. So 2009, lovely white house, well kept, well maintained. 2011, you can start to see it's starting to look a little rough. The landscaping's getting unkempt. The paint's starting to fade. It's not looking so hot. By 2013, clear signs of decay. The doors boarded up. The landscaping's taking over. Very much, beginning to be a blight on the neighborhood. And 2014, you see it burn down. And you can imagine if you're the property owner of this house here on the right side, one, it's been damaged by the fire. You can see the damage to the siding there. But even before the fire happened, right, if you're living in this house here and this is your neighbor's house, how likely are you to want to maintain your home, keep your property up when this is what you have to face, right? The influence on you is to be, well, my property value is already going to go in the toilet because I have this abandoned home right next to me. So maybe I'm not going to invest in my home. Maybe I'm going to let my home decline. I'm going to stop mowing my lawn so much. I'm going to let my paint start to peel. And so you can see how blight can spread and take even, nice homes on the block. You can eventually wreck the whole block. So some of the policies that contribute to housing affordability are the federal policies. So FHA is the Federal Housing Administration. They administer mortgages for homes, and so they don't allow for loans on mixed use and commercial properties. So banks then follow those same lending policies to make it more difficult for purchasers. Condos and stuff in mixed use developments are harder to get mortgages for. City policies have an enormous impact on the availability of housing. So things like large minimum lot sizes, lack of zoning for higher density and multifamily housing, parking standards, all of those things contribute to pushing the cost of housing up and making it more unaffordable for people who might want to purchase homes or rent homes in their communities. So sometimes these are intentional. Cities intentionally put in place exclusionary policies to keep out lower income residents. They don't want low-income residents because they see them as sources of crime. They're going to bring down the school quality. Density is going to increase traffic, right? All of these things are reasons that cities want to use to justify excluding housing for lower income residents. And so they make it more difficult for people to purchase, to get homes in those neighborhoods or those communities. And these local policies are a reflection of community values. So resistance to change and new development is widespread. You've heard the term, or maybe you haven't, heard the term NIMBY, NIMBY, not in my backyard. That is endemic across neighborhoods in the United States and other countries. People don't like change in their neighborhoods. People invest in their homes as a source of wealth, and they don't want anything that might potentially, possibly have the smallest negative impact on their property values to happen. And so even the most progressive and liberal people are very conservative when it comes to allowing any sort of change and development in their neighborhood, particularly, God forbid, if it's multifamily, and even more so if it's low income multifamily. People will literally riot to stop any kind of low income or affordable housing to be built in their neighborhoods. It's insane. And so this picture here that you can see, right, they have, your typical liberal sign. We believe Black Lives Matter, love is love, blah, 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 right? And yet here they go. They have say no to a multifamily development, right? That's going to house people that, can't afford to live in the neighborhood otherwise. So this is the kind of mindset that people have. They can be super liberal, super inclusive until it's happening in their neighborhood, and then they go batshit crazy about it. So very common that neighborhoods will resist change and don't want to allow anything that might negatively impact their investment. So how do we deal with this? One option is to change land use regulations. Look at our zoning code that tend to have, allow for multifamily housing, like big multifamily housing, like what you see on this right side of this picture, kind of your typical apartment complex style development. And over on this side, low density single family homes, right? The opportunity to create more affordable housing lies, in what we call the missing middle housing. So things like duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, where you have, small apartment complexes that have maybe 8 or 10 units on them, townhouses. If you look at some of our bigger cities, right, the most desirable neighborhoods are the townhouse neighborhoods, the brownstones in New York and Philadelphia, right? Those are some of the most desirable neighborhoods in the country, and they're very dense. They're townhomes. So a lot of our cities, a lot of our zoning ordinances don't allow for that style development to be built, and so allowing for regulations that incorporate this missing middle housing are very important and positive ways that cities can address affordability. And you can intermix some of these, as we'll talk about here in a second, how you can blend in some of these alternative densities into existing developments. And it's fairly gentle density, if you will. So Minneapolis is a city that has taken strides to address housing affordability through their zoning code. So about 70% of Minneapolis is currently zoned for single family housing. So your typical kind of suburban style, one house, one lot on forever. So that's 70% of the entire city of Minneapolis is zoned for a single family. In their 2040 comprehensive plan, the city identified housing as a goal and a challenge for the city to provide for more housing, more affordable housing. As the city is growing, that's become a challenge that they're recognized. And so what they've done is they set a goal to allow for duplexes and triplexes across their single family residential neighborhood. So 70% of the land use across Minneapolis will now be available for duplexes and triplexes to be built. And when you build those, they can be incorporated into existing neighborhoods without changing the fundamental character and fabric of those neighborhoods. So you can put a duplex or a triplex on a single family lot, and it really can be designed so the architecture is complementary to the single family homes around it. So it's not obviously a duplex or a triplex. The housing can be, the parking can be accommodated in a way that, again, mimics what's already existing in the neighborhood, so you don't have parking issues. And it's gentle density. It increases the housing availability without fundamentally changing the character of neighborhoods. You can see it on the street I live on here in River Falls. I've got, there's houses and there's single family homes and duplexes kind of intermixed along the street, and it works just fine. So you allow densification in areas where infrastructure already exists. So you're not having to build new water lines, wastewater lines, and roads to serve new development. That stuff's already in the ground. You're just adding capacity to it, hooking more houses onto the existing water and wastewater lines that are already there. And because it's duplexes and triplexes, you're not adding so much density that you're going to overwhelm the road network. You're not going to overwhelm the local schools. You're not fundamentally changing the nature of the neighborhoods by allowing this density to happen. And it's not going to happen all at once, right? It's going to be over time. A house sells here, somebody tears it down, builds a duplex or a triplex on it. A vacant lot there has a triplex built on it. It's not going to be like an entire neighborhood is all of a sudden going to transition from single family homes to triplexes. It's going to be here and there over time. So it's not a be all end all in terms of fixing the housing affordability crisis, but it is a big step towards that goal, because as new development happens on vacant land in the city, it's more likely to incorporate duplexes and triplexes. And as areas redevelop and vacant lots get filled in, it's more likely to be duplexes and triplexes. So you're adding that density in a sustainable and gentle way. So accessory dwelling units are another way to gently increase density. So accessory dwelling units are essentially just granny flats, if you will, or mother-in-law units. So garage apartments are an accessory dwelling unit. So you're putting, a second floor on a garage and putting a self-contained apartment up there. You're adding on to the back of your house to add a bathroom and small kitchen, or you're putting maybe a tiny house on the back of your lot and making that available. So the benefits to ADUs are that you can increase density, again, in a gentle manner. You're not fundamentally changing the character of development by adding a granny flat. You can make more housing affordable in two ways, because one, the ADU itself can be a relatively low cost rental option for someone. Additionally, that source of income for the property owner can offset some of their mortgage cost and allow them to afford their home more better, because they have that income from the ADU. You can increase density around transit stops, and is another way to increase housing affordability, because people can live in proximity to transit, don't necessarily have to own a car. So that's a great way to increase affordability without, again, putting development where it doesn't make sense. You're putting development in proximity to transit, so if people don't have to own a car, that can save them a ton of money, and they can use that money to potentially pay higher rents, or at least some of that money, to pay a higher rent than they otherwise could afford if they don't have to have the expense of a car. So you can see in 2017, the average cost to own and operate a vehicle is about $8,400. So if you do the math on that, so 8,469 divided by 12 is $700 a month to own a car. So if you could add, $700 a month to your rent or to your mortgage payment, that's a lot. That's a lot more you could afford. And if you only had to add, say, 500 of that to a rent, then that's $200 a month you're putting in your pocket, and because you're living in proximity to transit. So certainly an opportunity to make housing more affordable if we uh, add more housing in proximity to transit. And finally, this idea of location efficient mortgages. This is a fairly new idea that takes into consideration the cost of transportation as part of determining mortgage qualifications. So, again, going back to that $700 a month number, if you were to add that to your potential mortgage payment, you could qualify for a lot more house than you could otherwise. So, by taking into account, I'm buying a home in proximity to a transit stop, therefore, I won't have to own a car, or maybe my two income family can own one car, and my spouse will drive to work and I will take transit to work. That money you're saving by not owning a second car or not owning a car at all could be calculated into your mortgage so that you could qualify for that house near the transit stop. Hope that makes sense. Again, it's just allowing for accounting for transportation costs that we don't typically account for when we are thinking about cost of housing. So it's a way to broaden the scope of affordability when we can reduce transportation costs and apply those savings to housing payments. All right, so talking about sustainability in terms of a declining community. So Youngstown, Ohio is it it is a poster child for decline. It is kind of the quintessential Rust Belt industrial city whose population has declined precipitously from its peak. Incomes have dropped, social challenges have increased, drug abuse, crime, all of those things are on the upswing. And if you Google, urban decline, Youngstown pops to the top. They've also been pretty aggressive in trying to deal with decline. Most of planning, as we know it, is about focusing on growth and managing growth and dealing with growth. There's less research and effort put into managing decline. And given that so many of our cities, particularly in the upper Midwest, and many of our rural communities now are declining, we need to start focusing on that as a planning issue and ensuring that communities that are losing population are doing it in a way that's sustainable and ensuring that they are able to provide adequate service to their remaining population, maintain quality of life as best they can, and manage decline in a way that is um, sustainable. So Youngstown is seeing some um, interest, if you will, from people returning to it. They're seeing some young people coming back to the city. Not enough to overcome the larger decline, but at least there is some hope that people are recognizing opportunity in Youngstown and looking for ways to revitalize at least parts and pieces of it. So one thing that's bringing people back to Youngstown and other communities like Youngstown is this idea of shared identity and shared heritage. This recognition that other people have been through similar experiences growing up in these struggling communities, that there is value there. And that experience creates a strong bond to place. It's one of the reasons why when we see areas like Appalachia, struggling communities like Youngstown, when we think or people say, well, gosh, why don't all these people move to where the jobs are? If there's no jobs in Youngstown, there's no jobs in Eastern Kentucky or West Virginia, why don't people just pack up and go somewhere else? The problem is that people have a strong connection to place. There's reasons they don't want to move because they love where they're from, their family is there, maybe they've got elderly parents they need to take care of. Maybe they're invested in a business in this small town or their community and can't leave because of that. Or they're, in some cases, people don't have the financial capacity to move. right? Maybe they own a home that they can't sell because the community's declining. There's no market for someone to buy that home, so they're stuck. So there's lots of reasons people choose to stay in communities, and there's lots of reasons people choose to come back. And a lot of it is that social identity and shared heritage. So this sense of place people have and the connection to place where they grew up. There's also economic opportunity in some of these declining cities. Rents are much cheaper. There's a demand for business. So, what you see sometimes is people coming back, starting up breweries, art galleries, businesses like that that cater to the demand that's available. People want to have these things in their lives. And so entrepreneurs are recognizing that there is demand even in declining communities. There can be enormous demand for the particular products, for services that are being overlooked by the bigger companies. So there's a niche there that can be filled by small business and locally based business. And so there's opportunity to take advantage of the low rents and oftentimes flexibility in regulations and policies because these declining communities want to encourage development. So you'll get much more assistance and much more help from local governments in terms of going through the regulatory red tape and the process to get a business started. That can be much easier in these declining towns because they want business to locate there. So you get a much more positive experience than you would in a bigger city where they don't care if you live or die because there's a million other businesses wanting to be there. So you can get much more personal care and focus in these communities to be successful. And there's less competition as well, right? If you start a brewery in Youngstown, there's not going to be probably a lot of craft breweries to compete with you. So you have more opportunity to build your business and be successful because to some extent you're the only game in town. So that can be a benefit as well. So some policies and practices that can help with job creation and economic diversity and opportunity in these declining towns and really in any community. Things like job training and education. So ensuring that you're building the human capital and the capacity of your residents to be ready for jobs so that when a prospective employer comes sniffing around, you've got the workforce for them or you have the capacity to build the workforce that they need to be successful. Supporting your entrepreneurs and helping them to develop and be successful through things like incubators. So incubators are provide office space and services that go along with that office space as a way to support new businesses. So they have conference rooms and copy machines and reception help and professional looking office and all of those things that can help make their business successful. There's also brewery incubators, commercial kitchen incubators that provide support for home-based businesses to transition and scale up into a larger business. So there's lots of ways that incubators can be constructed to help foster local business. Then you have accelerators, which are I think we had a video about those when we talked about economic diversity. And accelerators are those that provide some injection of cash, often in return for a percentage of the business or future profits. They provide mentoring, they provide assistance in helping get a business off the ground and building it up quickly. And so there's ways to merge these two and ensure that entrepreneurs have the support they need to be successful. And co-op and mentoring programs, just again bring in expertise from existing successful businesses and other experts to help local businesses get the skills and the information they need to be successful. And in terms of environmental sustainability, the example of Rocky Flats weapons plant, I talked a little bit about this right before the end of this, or before we cut out for the end of the semester. It was at one time one of the most contaminated sites in the country. Had nuclear, chemical, and other contamination all across it. They had made nuclear weapons and chemical weapons on the site. It was enormously contaminated. The soil was buildings, everything was just a hot mess, just completely uninhabitable, and really was so contaminated they couldn't even continue to use it for its intended purpose, because people were getting sick, people were getting cancers, right? Lots of bad things were happening. And so there was a multi-year cleanup effort to remove the contamination, and return the property to functional use. The Rocky Flats is in proximity to Denver. So you have a rapidly growing urban environment, and then you have this like toxic waste dump, not very far away. And so there was an enormous need to do something about this property and get it in a state that would not be a detriment to the larger community of Denver. So the effort and the money spent on cleaning up the site has made it in a way that it's become a wildlife refuge, and there is public access to it. So again, what you have is this enormous open space in proximity to a very rapidly growing city. So you have wildlife habitat, you have ecosystem services, you have green space that people can access close to a major city. And so you get the environmental benefits of green space and habitat and ecosystem services. You get the social benefits of open space for the public and a place where people can go and be in community and spend time together and build relationships and all of those things. And you have the economic benefit of tourism and recreation that bring people to the area, and they spend money in Denver. So lots of benefits can come from the preservation and protection of open space, and through, in this case, cleaning up a toxic site, taking that hazard and threat away from the public, creating multiple benefits. And to kind of wrap things up, and think about social sustainability to some extent, the country of Bhutan, in 1972, the king of Bhutan made a decree that he wanted to focus on this idea of gross national happiness over gross domestic product. So if you think back to our economic talk, gross domestic product is the valuation of all the goods and services produced by an economy. It's the way that we measure economic success across the globe, and we want to see growth in GDP year over year as a sign of success. Obviously, right now with the coronavirus, our GDP is taking a giant dump. No surprise there. Nobody's working right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to GDP this year as the fallout of coronavirus goes across the economy. But anyway, this idea of gross national happiness is looking at how happy the community is, how happy this nation is. So it puts a focus on well-being over simple economic growth. Now, obviously, economic growth is part of well-being. When people are making more money, they're happier, tend to be. Not always, but when you have more wealth, you tend to be healthier, you tend to have better education, you tend to have kind of those, that foundation for happiness. But that is not a one-to-one ratio. So income goes up to a certain level, happiness goes up, but after a certain point, increased income doesn't contribute to more happiness, as we talked about in an earlier lecture. And it recognizes the importance of other elements of sustainability beyond economics. So social networks, relationships, sense of purpose, right? Does your job provide you meaning? Do you have, do you get meaning from other things? Your family, your religion, your social organizations you're a part of, your whatever it is that provides you meaning, is that a priority in your life? So it's not just about your job and how much money you make. It's about the whole aspect of your life and all of those different elements that actually do bring us joy. And the importance of recognizing this idea of gross national happiness is that you can actually start to, or the country, Bhutan, actually started to set policies focused on building happiness and contributing to individual meaning and purpose and joy rather than just growing the economy for the economy's sake. And so some of the principles or domains of gross national happiness is to address the standard of living. So that is an economic component, making sure not just that our GDP is growing year over year, but that people have an adequate income to support their life, that they're not worried about where their next meal is going to come from. They're not worried about being able to afford their house. They're not worried about, just funding the necessities of life. That's taken care of. And they can focus on their quality of life over just those basic necessities. Health, education, right? Certainly, education provides a sense of purpose. It can create new opportunities. It can give you meaning in your life. Health is a gimme, right? Everybody, if you don't have good health, you aren't going to be very happy. How we use our time. Do we have adequate time to do things that give us meaning in life beyond just work? Are we sitting in our cars for 3 hours a day because we have to live so far away from our job to afford a house? Or do we have time to spend with our family? Do we have time to spend doing hobbies that we care about? Do we have time to, volunteer? Do we have time to do things that matter beyond just work? So we want to think about opportunity for how we use our time. Good governance, we've talked quite a bit about. Do you trust your local government to do the right thing? Do you have minimal corruption that you have to deal with in your daily life? Do you trust that your government is making decisions in your best interest, that you can get fair access to remedies for legal issues or fair justice if you're, get in trouble or whatever, right? All of those things are part of good governance and they matter to our overall happiness. Ecological diversity and resilience, we've talked about that. Do we live in a place that has a clean environment? Do we worry about the quality of our water? Do we worry about the air quality that we have to deal with? Do we have, toxic sites near us that are making us sick? So do we have access to green space and open space and recreation opportunities in those spaces? Psychological well-being, community vitality. Do I live in a place where people are out and about, interacting with one another? Are there opportunities for recreation and entertainment and museums and symphonies and dance organizations and all of those things that help contribute to community vitality are important? And cultural diversity and resilience, right? So all of these elements are how we can measure gross national happiness, and it's a much broader and more holistic way of thinking than just focusing on the economic bottom line. It brings into account all three pillars of sustainability and how we think about sustainability and ensuring that our society is sustainable across the three pillars of economics, environment, and social, so that we're not just only worried about the almighty dollar and losing track of the rest of our lives. So that's it. So the activity, I'm going to talk about that for a hot second. I will, let's see if I can bring it up here. I will bring up, hold on one second here. Sorry. Let me bring it up. So the activity is review the 17 Sustainability Development Goals from the UN, right? These are them. They're posted here. I'll also post this PowerPoint in the module so you can get to it. Identify your top 3 to 5. We did this way back at the beginning of the semester, 14 years ago. So think about the 3 to 5 that you picked when I had y'all in groups in class do that. Think if your 3 to 5 maybe have changed over the course of the semester as we've talked about these different things. And then I want you to identify strategies that might influence these goals or move us forward to achieving these goals at the local, national, and global levels. Just a quick outline. I don't need, 14 pages, but just pick the 3 to 5 goals and then, just write down a couple, 3 strategies for each one. So don't need a lot of explanation with it, but I just want you to think about, again, leveraging what we've talked about over the course of the semester as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals, things that you've learned from the readings, from your own experience, and identify some strategies that can achieve those goals across different jurisdictions. So again, that will be posted in the module. That's what I got for today. We're down to our wrap-up lecture, kids. You made it. You did it. So we're almost done. Have a great rest of your day. Hopefully you are all... Where's my cursor? Hopefully you're all well. Talk to you soon. Bye. Man, that's weird.